The streets of Dar es Salaam have fallen silent. Only the distant echo of sirens breaks through the night, blue and red lights flashing across empty roads once filled with laughter and life. It feels like a scene we've seen before, because it is. Just a few years ago, it happened in Cameroon when President Paul Biya crushed dissent under the promise of order. And now, history seems to be repeating itself, this time in Tanzania. On what should have been a day of democracy, the streets are burning. Young Tanzanian students, vendors, workers have poured into the roads demanding one simple thing, a voice that matters. But instead of ballots, they're met with batons. Instead of freedom, they're given curfews. And instead of hope, there's the choking smell of tear gas. When the government cuts the internet and declares an evening curfew, it isn't just about control. It's about fear. Fear of a generation that refuses to bow. Fear of truth spreading faster than propaganda. Fear that the silence once used to rule is no longer working. Across the world, many of us have watched these stories before: the slow fading of democracy, the loud defense of security, the quiet return of repression. But here's the question we must ask tonight. Is Tanzania becoming the next Cameroon, or will its youth rewrite the ending? Because what's happening in Dar es Salaam isn't just about one election. It's about the future of Africa's freedom and whether the continent's youngest generation will still believe in the promise of democracy after the smoke clears. If you believe that truth should never be silenced, share this story. Subscribe to stay informed. Because in a world where the internet goes dark, sharing the truth becomes an act of light. October 29th, 2025, a day that should have been marked by celebration, a national vote, a renewal of faith in democracy. But instead, Tanzania woke up to something darker. From dawn, the tension was visible. Armed police lined the streets of Dar es Salaam, their shields glinting under the morning sun. Polling stations opened late. Some never opened at all. Journalists were turned away, cameras confiscated, and opposition observers detained before they could even reach the ballot boxes. By mid-morning, rumors spread like wildfire. The ruling CCM party was already declaring victory. The same faces, the same slogans, the same script that Tanzanians had heard for decades. Only this time the people were no longer willing to play along. Crowds began to gather near Posta, the city's central square. They waved placards that read, "Let us vote freely and we are not afraid." It started peacefully. Young students sang national songs, vendors handed out water, and elders prayed under trees. But when police fired the first canister of tear gas, everything changed. Phones captured the moment chaos erupted, women running for cover, motorcycles overturning, flames consuming a public bus. In Tandema, on the southern border, protesters stormed a police post after officers detained local opposition members. By afternoon, a gas station and a rapid transit bus were set ablaze. Within hours, smoke rose over the skyline, black pillars reaching into a gray, choking sky. The government's response was swift and merciless. At 6:00 p.m., the police announced an indefinite curfew in Dar es Salaam and several other towns. Citizens were ordered off the streets. Checkpoints appeared on every major road. Soldiers patrolled marketplaces, and journalists were warned not to report unverified events. By nightfall, 2 people were dead, 1 police officer, 1 civilian, dozens injured, hundreds detained. The government called it a necessary step to maintain order. But to the people watching their city burn, it felt like a declaration of war, not against violence, but against their voices. Then the silence deepened. Around 9 p.m., phones stopped working. Messages failed to send. The internet went dark. No WhatsApp, no Facebook, no X, not even SMS. Tanzania, a country of 60 million, was suddenly cut off from itself. NetBlocks, a digital rights watchdog, confirmed a nationwide internet shutdown affecting banks, hospitals, and emergency communications. In a country where online activism has become the lifeline of youth resistance, this blackout was more than a technical glitch. It was a strike at the heart of the people's connection, a calculated move to suffocate their unity. Inside one small apartment in the Mikocheni district, a university student named Asha whispered into her phone before the blackout hit, "If they shut us out from the world, we'll become our own media. We'll tell our story anyway. Her voice never reached the outside world that night, but by morning, fragments of videos and photos started to leak through VPNs and satellite links, burned buses, tear gas clouds, frightened faces hiding behind broken walls. It was clear the people were not backing down. In Mbeya, crowds gathered again despite the curfew, shouting one name: justice. Some waved homemade flags, others carried pictures of opposition leaders now imprisoned. The government called them criminals, but to many Tanzanians, they were heroes. As dawn rose over the Indian Ocean, Dar es Salaam looked like a city holding its breath, streets empty, billboards, half-burned soldiers guarding intersections. A government once celebrated for calm leadership now faced its own citizens as enemies. And yet beneath the fear, something powerful was stirring. In whispers, in chants, in secret gatherings, the youth of Tanzania began to ask the question their parents never dared to. If elections no longer change anything, what will night falls over Dar es Salaam? But this isn't a night of rest. It's a night of fear and defiance. When the internet went dark, a different kind of fire began to burn. Cut off from one another, Tanzanians started knocking on neighbors' doors, spreading news the old way by word of mouth. Students scribbled messages on walls: "We will not be silenced." Taxi drivers blared horns in a rhythm that became the protest's code. And for the first time in decades, a forbidden word returned to the streets: change. At 10:45 p.m., smoke rose from the Kariakoo district. Protesters torched a police outpost and overturned 2 armored trucks. In response, security forces swept through neighborhoods, dragging young men from their homes. Families huddled in darkness, whispering prayers, while helicopters circled overhead. It felt like a war zone without declaration. But amid the chaos, an even more shocking event began to unfold. Thousands gathered outside military barracks near the airport, holding candles and waving the national flag upside down, a symbol of distress. Their chant was simple: "Army, protect the people." Witnesses say soldiers watched silently from behind the fences, torn between duty and conscience. Some reports claim a few even saluted the crowd before being pulled back by commanders. By dawn, these scenes had gone viral through encrypted channels, escaping the blackout through VPNs and satellite connections. It was now impossible to hide. The world was watching. International media picked up fragments of the story: burned gas stations, hospitals filled with tear gas victims, police patrolling empty markets. The BBC, Reuters, and Al Jazeera reported rising casualties, while Human Rights Watch called it a systematic assault on civic life. Yet official government spokespeople dismissed the reports as foreign exaggerations, claiming the protests were isolated criminal acts. Still, the truth had already slipped through the cracks. Local hospital staff posted anonymous accounts of treating over 120 injured civilians overnight. Lawyers reported mass arrests, students, journalists, and even 2 priests who had opened church doors to shelter fleeing protesters. And the symbol of betrayal became unmistakable. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, once hailed as a reformer, the woman who promised to reopen democratic space after the death of John Magufuli, had now turned that promise into ash. Her face appeared on torn posters across the city next to words written in Swahili: "Mama wa hofu," mother of fear. It was this contradiction, a leader once seen as hope, now ruling through fear, that ignited the deepest anger. She was supposed to be our Mandela, one young protester told a local paper, but she became our Biya. Across Africa, comparisons flooded social media. Paul Biya's Cameroon, Macky Sall's Senegal, even Egypt under El-Sisi, all leaders who began with reformist tones but ended with iron fists. And now, Tanzania joined that list. By the second night, defiance had spread beyond Dar es Salaam. In Mbeya, Morogoro, and Dodoma, crowds lit candles in solidarity. They were no longer just protesting an election. They were mourning a democracy. And for every roadblock, a new chant arose: "We are not the enemy, we are the people." Meanwhile, embassies began issuing warnings to their citizens. The U.S. State Department urged restraint and respect for democratic principles, while the African Union called for immediate dialogue. But on the ground, dialogue was impossible. The streets were ruled by fear. Tear gas replaced conversation, armored trucks replaced ballots, and silence replaced democracy. Yet within that silence, something unshakable began to grow: unity. Students, taxi drivers, teachers, even market women stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing bread, passing information, protecting one another from arrest. It was messy, it was dangerous, but it was also historic. For the first time, a generation that had known only inherited fear learned to speak the language of courage. "They took our votes," said one protester, "but they'll never take our voice." That night, Dar es Salaam glowed not only from burning tires, but from thousands of candles held by those refusing to surrender the light. Morning breaks over a city that no longer feels alive. In Dar es Salaam, the sun rises on broken glass, shuttered shops, and burned-out buses. The air still smells of smoke and tear gas. And though the streets seem calm, it is not peace, it's exhaustion. The government calls it stability restored, but Tanzanians know better. They've learned that silence is not stability. It's fear in disguise. Hospitals across the capital overflow with the wounded, most too afraid to give their real names. Doctors whisper that many arrived with bullet wounds, others with crushed bones from police batons. Ambulances still move through back streets, picking up those left behind after the raids. In Muhimbili National Hospital, nurses hang white sheets over windows to hide the chaos from cameras. At the same time, human rights lawyers describe a new wave of midnight arrests. Men in plain clothes arrive at homes without warrants, dragging young activists into unmarked cars. Some return days later bruised silent. Others simply vanish. Families whisper the phrase, "Amapotia, he's disappeared." It's a word no Tanzanian wanted to say again since the dark days of the past regime. The ruling party's media machine begins its work. State TV airs footage of calm streets while government officials insist life has returned to normal. But on social media through VPNs and encrypted apps, the truth circulates photos of burned churches, empty schools, and mothers crying outside police stations. The country's moral contract, the invisible bond between the people and the state, is breaking. In the political arena, the effects are equally severe. Opposition parties already weakened are being dismantled one by one. Leaders in exile describe the crackdown as a slow suffocation of the republic. Civil society groups face deregistration, and independent journalists lose their licenses overnight. Even religious leaders once neutral begin to speak in sermons about a nation haunted by fear. Yet amid repression, something powerful begins to form a parallel civic spirit. Ordinary citizens step in where the state has failed. Students organize underground truth groups to share real information. Teachers hold secret classes on rights and constitution. And young people begin painting murals with words like "Ukweli ni nguvu," truth is power. These small acts of defiance spread quietly from town to town, Dodoma, Mwanza, Arusha, each flame hidden but alive. Even some local officials, tired of orders from above, begin leaking documents showing election fraud and censorship directives. Meanwhile, the economy starts to feel the strain. Foreign investors pause contracts. The Tanzanian shilling drops as fear drives capital out. Tourism, the country's lifeline, plummets after international warnings, and yet on the ground the people's resilience refuses to die. In a small fishing village outside Bagamoyo, an old man tells a journalist, "We've survived droughts, floods, and hunger. We can survive this too if we stay together." That sense of unity, born not from politics, but from shared pain, becomes the quiet revolution that follows the chaos. No one can predict how long the curfew will last or whether the government will tighten its grip. But one thing is certain, Tanzania will never again be the same. The illusion has been broken, and in that brokenness, something new, something unstoppable is beginning to rise. From Washington to Brussels, the news from Tanzania reached foreign desks like a faint signal through static filtered, delayed, and stripped of emotion. Headlines spoke of unrest, curfew, election tensions. But behind those sterile words lay a country gasping for democracy. In Washington, D.C., a State Department spokesperson issued the usual line, "The United States urges all parties to exercise restraint and respect democratic principles." A cautious phrase, one that could fit any crisis anywhere. Because Tanzania is more than a name on a map. It is a strategic partner, a gateway to the Indian Ocean, a base for counterterrorism operations, a trade route for East Africa. And for Western policymakers, stability often matters more than justice. At the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, leaders expressed deep concern, but their meeting ended, as many have before, with a call for dialogue, not accountability. The AU's silence spoke louder than its statement. For a continent that once vowed never again after colonial rule, it seems the lesson is still being learned. Meanwhile, international media began to connect the dots. CNN compared the unrest to Cameroon's post-election crisis, while The Guardian called President Samia's actions a betrayal of the reformist promise. Commentators in Europe debated whether Tanzania was sliding into authoritarianism or simply tightening control. But those discussions held in air-conditioned studios thousands of miles away could not capture the fear of a mother whispering her son's name into the night, hoping he hasn't been taken. In Paris, activists from Amnesty International gathered outside the Tanzanian embassy holding signs that read, "Democracy is not a crime." In Nairobi, journalists launched a campaign called Manar Light for Tanzania, using satellite connections to stream testimonies from those still inside the blackout. The movement spread quickly across African campuses from Accra to Johannesburg as students held candlelight vigils chanting, "One Africa, one voice, one freedom." And in an unexpected twist, discussions began to surface about Ibrahim Traore, the young leader of Burkina Faso, whose rise had become a symbol of Africa's new defiance. Analysts on African forums began asking, would Tanzania's youth have stayed silent if their nation had a leader who believed in them? Traore's call for sovereignty with dignity echoed through comment sections and talk shows, drawing a sharp contrast between leadership by courage and leadership by fear. Back in the United States, older Americans watching these reports couldn't help but see a mirror: the protests, the youth, the demand for truth. It reminded some of the civil rights era, different continent, same cry for justice. Because whether it's in Alabama or Dar es Salaam, the question remains universal: who owns the right to speak? By the end of the week, the UN Human Rights Council announced it would seek clarification from the Tanzanian government, a diplomatic way of saying the world is watching, but not yet acting. And that may be the greatest tragedy of all, that in a century defined by instant communication, a nation can still disappear behind a blackout while the world debates its hashtags. Yet not all hope is lost. Each candle lit abroad, each message shared, each voice refusing to fade becomes part of a quiet resistance. Because Africa's awakening is no longer confined to borders, and as leaders in the West reconsider their alliances, one truth becomes clearer with every protest. The next chapter of African freedom will not be written in foreign capitals, it will be written by its people. Tonight, Tanzania stands between fear and freedom. A nation once celebrated as a beacon of peace now trembles under the weight of silence. The curfew remains, the internet stays dark, and families whisper through locked doors, unsure who might be listening. But even in that silence, something powerful is happening, a quiet awakening. Because fear can paralyze, but it can also purify. It strips away illusion, exposing what truly matters. And in Tanzania, what's left is not just anger, it's clarity. The people now see with painful honesty that democracy without dignity is merely decoration. Across Africa, from Cameroon to Kenya, from Burkina Faso to Tanzania, one generation is confronting the same question. What good is a vote if the truth can't breathe? It is the same question that echoes through every protest, every blackout, every whispered prayer for change. And though governments may shut down networks, they cannot shut down memory. Though they may break the signal, they cannot break the story. That story of courage, of youth, of a people standing tall in the face of repression is spreading faster than any regime can contain. As global attention drifts elsewhere, Africa's young voices are crafting their own history, one protest at a time. Their message is simple: freedom is not a Western gift, it is an African right. And in the words of a young Tanzanian artist painting by candlelight, we are not burning our country, we are lighting our future. For viewers in the United States, this is not a distant tragedy, it's a reminder. Because democracy anywhere demands vigilance everywhere. And when silence becomes a weapon, truth must become our defense. The world once believed Africa needed saving. But maybe, just maybe, Africa is now reminding the world what it means to be free to fight for justice when it is no longer convenient and to speak when silence feels safer. So tonight, as the streets of Dar es Salaam fade into darkness, we ask, do you still believe that President Samia Suluhu can restore the promise she once made, or has Tanzania already crossed the point of no return? If you believe that truth should never be silenced, share this story. If you believe that Africa's youth deserve a future built on dignity, not fear, subscribe and stand with them. Because in a world where leaders fear the light, sharing it is an act of revolution.